At a core of well-being is actually value-based. Things that we value define what is well-being to me. If I value my family, then having good relationships with family members is going to be an important part of my well-being. If I value materialistic outcomes, then making a lot of money is going to be important to my well-being. The more we pursue happiness, that sort of felt sense of feeling happy, the more it actually undermines our sense of happiness. And so happiness is an end product when we pursue the things that we actually value and care about. It becomes more important to align things with the community that we're working with. So we can think about well-being from an individual perspective, but we can also think about well-being from a collective perspective. And I really can't separate my well-being from the well-being of the people and the context and the time that I live within.
Welcome to the Mindform podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. This is the Mindform podcast. Here we share real conversations with earnest seekers of the good life, uncovering gems of wisdom every time. Each guest is a unique expert in philosophy, psychology, and/or personal growth, and all are members of the Psychotecture collective and training platform Mindform. This week's guest is Peggy Kern. Peggy is a professor at the Centre for Wellbeing Science at the University of Melbourne. Her research draws on positive, social, personality, and developmental psychology and public health to investigate thriving across the lifespan. She works with schools and workplaces to examine strategies that support well-being and bridge gaps between research and practice. She's published 3 books, dozens of peer-reviewed articles, and the Palgrave Handbook of Positive Education. She's given talks around the world and developed several freely available well-being measures. It's a privilege to have you here, Peggy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you.
Awesome. What's alive in you, Peggy? How are you doing right now?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I've been doing some research today, working on a couple papers, and so digging into some of the research, which is always makes for a good day.
Yeah, you enjoy that part of the process?
I do. Yeah.
What particular research question have you been looking at today?
Uh, One thing that we've been focusing on is I've been writing a chapter about well-being, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure we'll talk about a bit more. Um, but really going into sort of the history of well-being, ways of defining it, looking
Oh,
at ways to build well-being, why it matters, and implications for research and practice. So it's it's
awesome.
it's kind of a nice. It was a very in-depth chapter, and so really got to play with a lot of concepts with that, and really think about not just a simple way of thinking about well-being, but well-being within all of its complexity.
It must always be a challenge with work like that, where you're trying to capture, a lot of different components, dimensions of a concept like well-being, to know what to keep and what to exclude, right? In terms of information, because there's endless depths, I'm sure.
There's endless steps, and there's different disciplines have different perspectives about what well-being is.
Yes.
And so it's sort of like thinking about, well, what perspective am I coming from? What are some other perspectives that are out there? And giving a sampling of those and being very
Mm.
careful of saying this is not covering everything that's out there. It's giving a taste of what's out there, because if we really cover everything, it would really be more than a chapter. I mean, there are books
More than a
written
chapter, for
about
sure.
well-being. There's a lot that's been written about well-being, and so even the question about what we include and what we exclude, that's actually a big question.
That must be something you bump into a lot, looking at, sort of bringing in together a few different perspectives and aspects of well-being in your work, as you must bump into the difference in language and perspective and terminology between different, just almost like subcultures of academia,
Yeah.
or just the interesting in the cultures that have an interest in well-being. I got a taste of that just as just as a graduate student of psychology, just like, oh, it seems like they're talking about almost the same thing, but I can't find almost any place online where both of these two frameworks or both of these two perspectives have been brought into the same conversation about this one thing they're talking about. There's so much of that split, isn't there?
There's very much sort of what's been called a jingle jangle fallacy.
Mm,
And so we have different terms that are being used to describe the same thing.
yeah,
And then we use different terms to describe or we have the same thing can be called different things in different fields.
yeah.
And one challenge we really see in the well-being space is there's a lot of siloed work. So
Mm,
for instance, my training was in health psychology. And then I moved over to positive psychology, so sort of two subdisciplines within psychology. And the two have sort of evolved independently, mostly of one another. And so they're
yeah,
talking
definitely.
about similar ideas, but they're using different language and they're not really learning from each other. And so, like, when I write about well being, I try to actually bring some of these different perspectives together so that we can actually bridge those gaps in conversation.
Yeah, I personally find that sort of, I guess, integrative component of research just really intellectually exciting. It can be so fun when you're like, oh, they fit together perfectly in this kind of way, or maybe these terms capture both points there. That for me is a rewarding moment.
I love the
Um,
integrative stuff. And that's sort of one of the passions of my work is actually bringing a lot
yeah,
of different ideas together and saying what happens when we put them together as opposed to having them being siloed in different disciplines or different researchers, even within the
mm,
same discipline, will disagree with each other. But I think there's a lot that we can learn when we actually integrate things together and say, okay, what's the bottom line here? What can we understand about human functioning? And how can that influence the work that we do when we work with people?
yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, can you tell us a little bit about your work? I suppose that the question is, what are some like some experiences in your life or some things you learned that have led you to doing what you do now? I understand it's full time for you, the research and the work and all these different dimensions, bringing them together of well-being psychology. So how did you end up here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, really, like the big picture of what my researcher looks at is understanding thriving in life and what that looks like across the lifespan, and what are social and personality factors that impact upon the life well lived. And what brought me to this was actually personal experiences of having my own both mental and physical health challenges. And so, really struggling with a sense of well being,
Mm,
both physically and mentally. And it really started bringing up questions in my mind about, who does well in life, who struggles in life, and what are the things that actually impact upon the trajectory that we take across the lifespan.
mm-hmm.
And so when I went into my PhD, I studied health psychology, I was fortunate enough to work on a longitudinal data set that was started in 1921 and followed people across their entire lives.
Is this
Uh,
the Dunedin study?
no, this is the determined life cycle study. The Dunedin
Oh,
study is
okay.
another one. So we sort of had a couple
Yeah, yeah.
longitudinal studies that were going on at the same time, which learned from each other. So we
Yeah.
actually talked a lot to the Dunedin people and
Cool.
learned from one another. And so with that data set, I could really look at different people's lives and say, how did their life unfold? What impacted upon their life experiences? Who did well in life and who really struggled? How long did people live? Who died earlier? Who died later? And so from early on, I really became interested in the life well lived and what that looks like. And then from there, I did a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania focused on positive psychology, which really brought me into the well being space, which is really focused on understanding how to define, measure, and build well being. across diverse communities. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I love about working in this space is it it's very practical because well-being affects our everyday lives. We all want to know, how can I live a good life? What does that look like? How can I help? I want my kids to have a good life. I want to live a good life. We want our workplaces to be happy places that people are able to function productively. And so a lot of the work that I work on is very applicable to sort of the real world.
Yeah, that that's a privilege in the world of academia,
It
because
is.
sometimes it can feel like you're a few steps removed from that kind of. So that's fantastic, and I'm thrilled for you there. Maybe you you talk about the good life. You want that for yourself. You want that for your kids, and obviously you look at different conceptions of well-being. It sounds like, as you look across diverse populations and that. But what is the good life to you? What is this well-being that you're seeking, that you started seeking when you felt you were dissatisfied with your physical and mental well-being, and you started this journey? What is the good life to you?
It's a really good question, and one that depends who you talk to. They'll give a different answer. At a very simple level, well-being is feeling good and functioning well. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
definition that comes from my colleague Felicia Huppert and Thomas So. And I love that as sort of like feeling good and functioning well, because if we aren't feeling well, that's going to affect how we're functioning. If we're not functioning well, that's going to affect our feeling. But then what does that look like? And that's where, when we get into different populations, different things matter to different people. So for some people, having really good social relationships with others is really important for a sense of well-being. For others, it's having a sense of meaning and purpose in life. For others, is sort of that felt sense of I feel happy or I don't feel happy.
Mm.
For others, it's a sense of accomplishment or feeling competent in what you're able to do. For others, it's a sense of sort of autonomy or freedom, freedom in thought, freedom in activities and what we can do. And so as we talk to different people, people have different perspectives about what matters to them in terms of the life well lived. There are commonalities. So things like feeling good, engagement in life, having good relationships with others, having a sense of meaning and purpose. Spirituality comes up quite a bit. And that's not
What does, sorry?
spirituality.
Yeah, yeah.
So that comes up quite a bit. But then sort of how we rate different areas of our life depends on our own experiences, our own background, our own culture, and the times that we're living within.
Right, right. So that's to say, what your well-being isn't just even the quality of your experience of emotion or relationship or meaning, but it's the frames you have that you filter that through,
Yes.
and then you're measuring. Okay, is this my idea of what a good life is? Right.
Right. So at a core of that is well-being is actually value-based. And so the
Mm.
things that we
Right.
value actually define what is well-being to me. So if I value my family, then having good relationships with family members is going to be an important part of my well-being. If I value materialistic outcomes, then making a lot of money is going to be important to my well-being.
Well,
Um,
that's my question. That was a question that came to mind earlier. Is you listed a few different things, right? And
yeah,
now we're getting into values as well, that people might I suppose measures people might use, or priorities people might have to determine, is this is this the good life, or am I well? Am I doing well? Um, my inclination is not like there's a real diversity there, but there must be, people also have ideas about what's good for them
yeah.
that might not actually line up with what's good for them. And to me, what you presented just then was a perfect example, right? Where um, how much do people, and you might have a statistical answer to this, I don't know, but how much do people who value material things, say, as a high value, a sort of high tier value in their decisions, or what they say is important to them, how much do they actually have an overall sense of well-being when they attain that, or is it like the sages of old say that actually that's not fulfilling?
We actually find like the material values are actually often undermine well-being. So
Mm,
what can happen is you get caught in the pursuit of more and always having
yeah,
more, and that comparison with others who have more than you, and wanting to live up to a standard. And so we do find that other areas, other sort of values that we might have, tend to be more related to that ongoing feeling of well-being. So things like
right.
having good relationships with our families and friends, having a sense of meaning and purpose. Um, it is actually fascinating. There's research that shows that the more we pursue happiness, that sort of felt sense of feeling happy, the more it actually undermines our sense of happiness. And so
Mm,
happiness is sort of like an end product when we pursue the things that we actually value and care about.
So this is so it's it's about like the sense of, right, which is your definition of well-being, good functioning and good feeling comes about through pursuing things that you define as valuable, but also maybe things that actually are valuable,
Right.
and then you have that list, right, of things that maybe across cultures are defined as
Right.
valuable, and that speaks to some core truth there, right, which is like vital engagement,
Yeah.
purpose,
Yeah.
relationships, and spirituality.
Yeah.
What is there anything else that I haven't listed there that's really a core universal theme that seems to have a big impact on?
Physical health is the other one that comes
Right.
up, is having good physical health. And when people start feeling poorly physically, it impacts upon their well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. What's something surprising you've learned in your research across diverse populations about different conceptions, whether it's different conception of well-being or different ways that people approach well-being? What's something that has shifted your perspective a little bit as you looked at different views there?
I think I've looked at different perceptions about well-being, um, the thing that has sort of struck me is that you have a lot of academics that come up with a model of well-being. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "This is what well-being is according to my definition." And then they promote that to everybody. And people are like, "Well, it must be research-based because obviously it comes from an academic." But really,
Yeah.
it's just their personal theory about what well-being is. And
Right.
so actually, kind of like each of us have our own personal theory about what well-being is. And some of
Mm.
that lines up with what so-called, the experts say, and sometimes that doesn't. And it becomes more important to align things with the community that we're working with. So we can think about well-being from an individual perspective, but we can also think about well-being from a collective perspective. So
Mm.
I experience my well-being within the community that I'm a part of. And it's impacted by my relationships with people and the places that I engage with. And I really can't separate my well-being from the well-being of the people and the context and the time that I live within. So
Mm. Mm.
what's surprised or what I've really learned through my work is to actually take this much more sort of sophisticated perspective about what well-being is, that really anchors it in sort of the contextual factors that really impact upon the personal felt experience of well-being.
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think of some of the conversations we have in New Zealand, just across the ditch here, about well-being. So, something that had recently become and is still growing more significant part of our psychology field, I guess, when I was a student, was multi worldviews. So that's, New Zealand Indigenous people, of well-being, and it's pretty well established now in the health sector, and the sort of clinical psychology world as well, and just sort of all of the different places where there's a professional structure and people are engaging with individuals for their health, for their wellness, for their quality of life. There's this idea of there's this appreciation of uh, leaning more into sense of place, community, and spirituality when engaging with Maori, because that lines up more strongly with their definition, with the Maori definition of well-being, which is less maybe about which is it's less like the individualist kind of Western. Oh, I feel like I'm living a life that's aligned with my values, or I'm succeeding, or whatever, and it's more do I feel like I'm connected to what I belong to, or what I am a
Yeah.
part of, which is like
Yeah.
my whakapapa, my heritage, i.e. that's the Māori word for heritage, and all of that. So so I think in our country there's a strong appreciation of the importance of that. But what we've found, at least what I found, like, not we, this is me academically extending, like you said people do, but what I found is that language and that shift to prioritization has actually been beneficial to everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, all of us in this country benefit from this increased dialogue about sense of belonging in place, and sense of like knowing your and feeling connected to your kind of identity as it relates to your heritage. Um, and spirituality as well, right? Like, these conversations are growing, and I think it's beneficial to everybody. What have you found? You say there are these models that come out, and they, it's kind of like reminds me of that term weird in
Yeah. Yeah.
psychology, Western. I might get it wrong, but you probably know the
Western
list. Could you say it?
educated,
Industrialized.
industrialized, rich, and democratic, I think.
Yeah. And it's like, all of this research that's done in psychology, but it's all upper middle class white
It's the
25-year-old
ivory tower.
psychology students.
It's the
Yeah.
ivory tower of these academics who don't actually interact with people in sort of like everyday life. And they just go thinking about things and then say like, well, this is the model of well-being that we should be following.
Mm-mm.
And this is the measure that you should be using. And through my experience, I would say that you really need to actually understand the people that you're working with and really adjust your definitions, your models, your measures, just and your interventions to really fit the population that you're working with. And I think the work that's been done in New Zealand is a fantastic example of that. And I
Mm.
think you're
Cool.
starting to see some similar work going on in other places. Australia is a bit behind New Zealand in terms of appreciating Indigenous knowledge, but
Yeah.
we're moving in that direction. Um, but I think the more that we can actually be really focusing on moving beyond the individual and thinking about the community that the individual is a part of actually has a big impact upon our own experiences individually.
Mm-mm. Now, maybe you've already said the only answer to this question, but I'm curious. Given that there are these models that don't apply ubiquitously, that people build, or these definitions that aren't for everyone of well-being, what have you found as you've looked across the board that does seem to be universal? Besides, maybe, we've already said, there's physical health, spirituality, relationships, like that's important to everybody. Have you found anything else about well-being or how it works that I guess it's a rule you've not really found exceptions to?
The one that I found that has been really interesting is self-determination theory. So by Ryan and DC, and they talk about three basic needs that we have as human beings. So belonging, competence, and autonomy.
Mm,
And we really see that there's elements of that that really do fit across most cultures. And so it's sort of like when we have these basic needs that are met, then we're more likely to be experiencing well-being. And then the question is, are we living in a context that actually supports the basic needs that we have as human beings? So I think we all have certain needs. We all have certain values. The more that the context that we're living in supports our needs and our values, the more we're going to actually experience well-being.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, from all this, how have you integrated some of these ideas into your own pursuit of well-being, or how has your pursuit of personal well-being shifted as you've learned about different perspectives of well-being?
I think my own pursuit has been, um, moving away from sort of like the individualistic perspective is sort of that hedonic, I feel happy. Um,
Mm,
and one thing that so I've really moved away from that sense of sort of like well-being is just feeling happy. But I think the one that comes out of that for me is actually feeling contented.
mm,
That's not as sort of like an as enthusiastic as being very happy, but it says that I can actually be content with my life regardless of the ups and downs that are going on in my life. And so I have a lived experience with mental illness. And I've struggled quite significantly with mental illness. And so there's been that question of when I have mental illness, can I still experience well being? And what I find is that, I can still live according to my values. I can
mm.
still have good relationships with other people. I can find peace in my life. And that gives a sense of contentedness, even though I might not have those felt feelings of happiness.
Right, right, yeah, and that was a question that came up for me when you presented that, and you would agree, very simplistic definition of well-being, right? Which is feeling good and functioning good, or something along those lines. Which is there's a myriad different kinds of feeling good. There's there's those sort of immediate pleasures of the body, and then there's enthusiasm about something for a brief moment. There's the good feelings you get from drugs, and then there's the sense of pride, or the sense of connection, or the sense of curiosity. Those are all very different kinds of feeling good. You mentioned uh, living in alignment with your values. Now, that's something. We've sort of touched around that so far, but that in sort of the Mindform world, the community, that's like a big part of our conversation, our dialogue. We've sort of all read a book together, written by the founder of Mindform, called "Become Who You Are," which is the whole. It's virtue self-signaling theory, and the idea is like eudaimonia, the good life, is kind of having a sense that the way you're living is in alignment with your own values. So how does that, I guess, framework fit into your conceptions of well-being? Because it sounds like it's at
That
least
that fits
involved in your
very
pursuit of
well.
well-being.
That fits very well into my conception of well-being. It's sort of like we have values and beliefs about who we are, who we want to be as a person. Uh,
Hmm.
and the more that we live according to that, and those values are influenced by our background, they're influenced by the culture that we live in, they're influenced by the time of history that we're in. So those values are influenced by a lot of things, but the more that we're actually living attuned to our values, I would suggest that that's when we're going to experience a greater sense of well-being. And when we have a real disruption between what we value and what we do, then that actually impacts upon the way that we feel and experience our lives.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think most of us can relate to that experience, of knowing the difference between when we like what we're doing and who we are, and when we don't, and the huge shift that has in the overall sense of wellness in life. Um, what are sort of the key? You mentioned context, right? That's important, our well-being. Um, and I know that your work looks into sort of, it's a systems. There's a bit of a systems thinking view on well-being. So stepping out from the individual level there, how much am I experiencing meaning, or how much am I experiencing positive emotional, physical health? What are some of the major leverage points or systemic factors that, in the context that people are in the systems that people are a part of, that have, uh, I suppose, an outweighed a substantial impact on well-being?
Yeah, so we can think about the different systems that people are a part of. So, like for instance, the workplace has a big impact on how people feel and function. If if I work in a place that is psychologically safe, so that's one factor that we've been seeing has been coming out in the research,
Mm,
is having a sense of psychological safety in the workplace. Um, that's actually going to make it more possible for me to experience well-being at work than if I'm in a place where there are a lot of psychological hazards. Also doing if we have work that is actually meaningful for us to be doing, that's going to be supporting our well-being. So there's the workplaces that we work in, and our work lives have a big impact on the home life. So that especially when we have people that are working from home, working, hybrid, a lot more like we've lost a lot of the boundaries between work and home lives. And so work has an influence on how we experience well-being. The communities that we live in, is it safe? That's actually a core thing, is do I live in a safe neighborhood? If I don't live in a safe neighborhood, that does undermine well-being. Things like the policies, the sort of the norms around the community. Is it a place that
Hmm.
actually fosters connection with one another? Nature is another one. So having a lot of natural access can have an influence on that felt sense of well-being. And so if we're thinking about if we're an organization or a community, we want to be thinking about how can we create conditions that actually allow people to
Hmm.
experience a sense of well-being. And because everyone ought to be able to experience well-being, but the reality is a lot of people cannot experience well-being because they live under conditions that actually are crippling to that sense of experiencing the good life. And so it's actually our responsibility, if we do have power, that we actually have to use that power to support the well-being of those that we're actually working with or that we actually have an impact upon.
Mm, mm. So when you think about, like, the sort of political or power structures within a workplace, or the political power legal structures in a community, in a city, infrastructure, physical space, all of these things, what um there's what the research says, and there's a lot there, but just going to you for a second, what do you envision? Like, what's a passion point, I suppose, for you, in terms of like what you would love to see be different in the way we structure these worlds, that you think would have a really profound impact on overall collective well-being?
Yeah, so I think the few touch points that I would really focus on, number one is schools. So our schools have a huge impact on our communities. Our children all go to schools, but then parents are connected to schools. The community is connected to schools.
Hmm.
And so how we run our schools, and so I've done a lot of work in positive education, which is really thinking about how we can actually bring out best in everyone that's a part of our educational community, which includes students, teachers, non-teaching staff, the community that surrounds the school. And so how
Hmm.
can that be a sort of a point in our society that can actually be sort of a beacon of hope and sort of
Yeah.
encouraging the well-being of, if we help students, that's going to help their parents, which is going to then help the community. So thinking about schools from a communal perspective. um, w-
Yeah. What are some specific shifts in terms of like norms, or structures, or cultural shifts? Like, what are some specific shifts that you've worked towards, or that you'd love to see in schools that toward that end?
yeah, so number one is making well-being one of the core values of the school.
Mm,
So we actually think about
nice.
the values and mission of the school. We for a long period of time, we've had big emphasis on grades, and national test scores, and that puts a lot of pressure on our students and our staff. And so actually putting well-being at the heart of our educational institutions is actually one thing. Number two is um, really focusing on starting with the teachers and the staff, because
Hmm.
oftentimes they're the ones that are actually going to be impacting upon the well-being of our students. And if our teachers are not well, they can actually help the well-being of the students that they work with.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
actually need to start with the staff if we're actually going to have an impact on the school. We need to work with the leaders. So often leaders will just sign off on things and then walk out of the room, but they really need to be involved in the initiatives that are going on in schools. Number
So you find that you find that like involvement of decision makers like in the process is significant to the sort of sense of well-being throughout the school.
Very much. So, one of the challenges that we often see in education and in communities and in health systems and all over is
Mm-hmm.
that those who are making decisions about things are often very removed from the people who actually
Are
experience,
affected
are
by the
affected
decisions.
by
Yeah.
the decisions that are made. And so, the more that we can actually bridge that gap and they can actually be connected to those that they're actually influencing upon, that actually has flow on effects throughout the whole system. And so we need
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
leaders that are not just sort of, separated from those that they actually impact upon, but they really need to be connected to those that they're making decisions about.
In your work with workplaces or schools, have you been able to see some shifts in a sense of well-being
We have.
through making that change in terms of
We
involved
have.
leadership?
We have.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
Um,
exciting. That feels like such a difficult thing to change. Could you maybe tell a story about that if you have a good one?
I think one of the stories that I really liked was, uh, we were I had the opportunity to work with some schools in the Upper Hunter Valley region in New
Mm-hmm.
South Wales, Australia. And basically, there there was a youth suicide that really
Oh,
became a catalyst for changing, or it really became sort of a call for the community to really rethink about how they're doing education. And then what they did is they actually did a whole bunch of professional development, and really worked across different schools to actually bring well-being into the heart of the curriculum.
mm-hmm.
And so the community really rallied around it because there was this sense of we don't want more tragedies like this appearing in our communities.
Yeah.
And so teachers actually were trained in activities and curriculum and whatnot that would support well-being. Um, and um, and so there were some shifts in at least some of the schools that were committed to this, in terms of how they ran their schools, and um, that work has continued. I haven't seen the most recent stuff that has gone on in that community, but it was seeing some shifts in terms of the felt well-being or the felt mental health experiences of the students, the teachers, and the community.
Amazing. It's cool to know that like at that systems level that you can there are ways to intervene that make a difference and a lasting difference, because those always feel, I think part of the reason that we focus on our own well-being is because we feel that's the only place we maybe, or at the local level, is that that's the only place we have much influence or control. So that's really encouraging.
I think the
um
one thing that when we are working with systems is things take a long time. And that's one of the
mm,
challenges about it, is that there are no quick fixes. And
yeah.
oftentimes systems are making decisions based on sort of either an annual review or a quarterly review. And you're not going to see well-being changes that quickly. And so really
Yeah.
what we need is communities that are investing in long-term change. And what we've really seen in schools, especially, is it really takes 5 to 10 years to really change the culture of the school in ways that has lasting effects on well-being for the school community.
Mm. I wonder if part of the reason for that kind of time frame is that that's how long it takes for the majority of the population of the school to have entered it
Yeah,
in this new
yeah,
culture, right? And
yeah.
this new presentation of this is how we do things. Um, because there's just that inertia, right? Like first impressions matter kind of thing. If a kid doesn't feel safe at a school, it's going to take a lot to shift that feeling.
Yeah, yeah. And what we do see is when you start looking at mental health in schools, you actually, if so you're saying, okay, we're going to focus on well-being, you actually see ill-being increase for a period of time. And it's not
Oh,
necessarily that
interesting.
It's actually fascinating. It's not because there's more problems there. It's that it becomes okay to talk about the problems. And so all
Mm,
of a sudden, students that were actually struggling actually are made known to the staff. And so it looks like we're increasing the amount of ill-being, when in reality it's just putting a mirror on what's already there. And over time, it shifts to much more being a proactive approach that prevents ill-being from happening in the first place.
mm. I had a conversation recently with someone on the podcast um, who has critiques, and I agree with a version of these, much of it, which is it's a critique of the way that we talk about well-being and mental health as a culture, particularly a critique of kind of viewing so many problems through the lens of am I mentally well or unwell, and kind of always or too much, I suppose, in his mind, having conversations of how are we feeling, are we feeling good or not, and kind of this, his sentiment is that having our attention. So, and you sort of mentioned an idea similar to this earlier, right? Like a pursuing happiness can undermine happiness, right? So, how do you, I guess, how do you reconcile that, or how do you approach or navigate the conversation around well-being so that you're not sort of, and you've said it yourself, that there's a degree of ill-being that's almost necessary to the process as you become aware of problems, but there's also the risk, right, of um, my view is that there's the risk of, if there's just overexposure, I suppose, to all these conversations, or if the conversations are maybe happening in a certain kind of way about well-being, you just end up with a group of people who are ruminative, I suppose, reflecting on their own feelings, measuring how happy am I, how happy am I not. So yeah, how do you address that concern?
Yes, and we've actually seen problems with that with schools that have been called themselves well-being schools.
Okay.
And they've said, they've labeled themselves as a well-being school. They're all about feeling good. And then you find students are just experiencing their adolescence. There's a lot of ups and
Yeah.
downs as you're an
Yeah,
adolescent. There's a lot of times that you just don't
of
feel
course.
good, but then you're in a school where you're getting pressure that you're supposed to be feeling good. That can actually
Right.
undermine the well-being process. And I think this is where moving it away from that sort of feeling, it's all about how I feel happy, that hedonic feeling of happiness, and thinking about deeper levels of well-being, of sort of like the life well lived. So,
Hmm.
who am I as a student, and how can I live in accordance with who I want to be? That's a different conversation than, how can I feel happy today?
Yeah, so my wife's a teacher at a secondary school, and they have this framework in that school called voice, action, and identity, which is VI for short, VAI, and a friend of mine, I think, was involved in setting that up. Um, and I it's one way you could look at it, although I don't think it's framed in this way. But that might be one example. Tell me if I'm wrong, of focusing or addressing well-being, but not through the lens of emotion, right? So they sort of have they have the whole structure there, and I don't know all the details. I don't work at the school, but where you're sort of, there are structures to encourage and celebrate kids using their voice. So that's like speaking about what they believe in, or action, which I think is to do with like agency or self-determination, and then identity, which is being connected to your roots, or communicating from a place of connectedness to your sort of cultural identity, or whatever it, or religious identity, whatever it is. So is that sort of the angle that you're trying to take, or things like that, when you come to schools and you're addressing well-being? It's not, hey guys, let's start talking about our mental health. It's more like, okay, these are some structural changes, or these are some conversations that we know when people are focusing on this, that has the impact on mental health.
It's exactly it. So it's create, and that's where it's about creating the conditions for well-being to actually happen.
Right.
We do hear, we do see student voice is important. That sense of identity is important. Connection with other students and with teachers is important.
Hmm.
Having a sense of sort of like my life is actually meaningful versus feeling very hopeless, is important. And so actually creating focusing on these areas. Strengths is another one. So what am I good at, and focusing on the strengths. and using my strengths. So that's an example. Like the example you shared is a good example of creating conditions for well-being to happen that doesn't have that unintended consequence of sort of like, oh, I'm supposed to feel happy when I don't feel happy, so there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So there's all these factors, right, that come together, addressing well-being, and that's one example of an unintuitive thing, maybe, or not what you might initially expect, is focusing more on happiness or trying to get well-being is doesn't necessarily lead you there. What are some really impactful levers, I suppose, things that are really important to well-being that people don't really think of or ignore or aren't aware of when it comes to impacting their own well-being? So you're thinking about the system at large and all the different kind of flows that come in. What's something that's actually plays a really major role but just doesn't get enough attention in your mind?
Okay, a few things. So number one, uh, the, Corey Keyes developed the Dual Continuum Model of well-being, which really puts ill-being and well-being on two different dimensions. Um,
Oh, okay.
and so
Rather than two ends of the same
rather than
spectrum, you
two
mean?
ends of the same spectrum.
Right.
And the beauty of that is that it means ill-being and well-being can actually coexist. This really resonates with me, with that lived
Mm,
experience of mental illness.
right.
It means I can have mental illness. That's just something that's a part of what I have, the same thing as I have physical illness, but it
Mm,
doesn't have to define me, and I can still have experiences of well-being. And so having
I
that
love that.
complexity of sort of like ill-being and well-being can and do coexist. So I think that's one thing. A second thing is a sense of belonging. So we have found that belonging is really important. Teachers play an important role in creating a sense of belonging. Students, help each other feel a sense of belonging. And the school community does a lot in terms of building a sense of this is a place where I feel like I'm a part of, I'm respected, I'm cared for, or a place that I'm disconnected with. And that's when we see a lot of behavioral issues that are appearing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So belonging and so with the ill-being thing, it's the problem there, I suppose, of not appreciating that is that people have all this focus on the ill-being, and this needs to be gone, and I can't be happy while this is here,
It's sort of like a
right?
problem that has to be fixed. You have
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
illness, so I have to fix you. And if we change that
mm, mm,
conversation to, well, actually, there are some really good things about you. You just struggle with an illness. And so, how can we support you in that illness the same way that we would support someone with a physical illness to actually,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
still be healthy? The sense of belonging, it gives you a sense of sort of like, I feel like I'm connected to the school, and that does influence both how students feel and function and their academic performance and whatnot. Um, and focusing on strengths is another thing. So, what are we actually good at, and bringing out more of that, as opposed to always focusing on what we do wrong and what we can't get right. Um, and the language that we use in schools or our communities or whatnot, is it more positive in nature, or is it more negative in nature? We have a lot of sort of
Right.
like negative language that goes on. I mean, you turn on the news, there's so much negative stuff. There's negative language used, just in our classrooms, in our workplaces, just all over the place. And so actually trying to shift our language to more sort of inspiring and positive language without being sort of the motivational quotes, it's like that sort of is sort of like that doesn't really get at what we really need. Um
Mm, mm. But I get it. It's the difference between I right, I just imagine, being a new student at a school and everyone's talking about and the posters are all about these are the things that are dangerous, these are the things that are bad, these are the problems
right.
we're trying to solve, as opposed to going to a place, a classroom, the assembly or whatever, and people are talking about this is what we are excited about, this is what we're trying to
Exactly.
achieve. It's a very, very different feeling, and the conversations you have with people are different, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
Yeah. So outside of sort of the over ruminative focus on happiness and well-being, are there any other places that people, sort of the opposite to my previous question, that people put a lot of effort into, a lot of focus in the pursuit of well-being, that's you see as kind of being a waste of energy or a waste of attention, where that would be better spent elsewhere?
I think a place where I see it a lot is sort of like there's a massive focus on sort of the self-help type approaches to things. And a
Hmm.
lot of that is sort of like do something that makes you feel good, get to go to a spa, get a massage, it'd be great.
Self-care kind of, yeah.
Self-care, self-care is important, but the self-care that we need is doing things like getting good sleep, eating healthy foods, moving our bodies, having, good conversations with other people, getting off of technology all of the time. These are self-care things that are actually going to do a lot more than these sort of like me going and spending money on myself.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose the reason, well, my view of the reason that why that's kind of gone off course a little bit is it's the commodification
Yes,
of
exactly.
self-care, right? It's the people go, "Oh, people are starting to pay attention to self-care. I bet I can invent a product or sell something that I'm good at, that and tell them that that's the thing they need to get self-care." And that just takes people a bit off track, doesn't it?
It does.
That's certainly been a big learning for me in terms of my journey to, well, yeah, both. I would say physical and mental well-being is like realizing that it's not about, you know, having this particular kind of diet or this particular kind of exercise routine or yoga or whatever it is, but actually just like looking after my baseline,
Yeah,
like, yeah, getting off the computer, going to bed on time, moving my body in some kind of way regularly. Um, yeah, that's what one is, I suppose, me listening to these ideas I'm presented about who and what I should be, and the other, which are probably commercially motivated, and the other is just listening to my body that's
yeah,
not feeling great because I'm tired or hungry or
exactly.
something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, big difference, eh? Well, you mentioned before our call that you're doing some work on integrating like clinical psychology approaches, like ACT therapy, for example, with positive psychology and flow theory. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about that before we get to the end of our call. Maybe you could start with where the motive comes from with this, and how it connects with all of your work on perspectives of well-being and well-being systems, how that kind of led you to this particular interest you have.
Yeah, so I got involved in this interest. This is actually coming out of a collaboration that I have with one of my former PhD students who has become one of my dear colleagues. And he's a clinical psych. And so he uses DBT and ACT in his therapy that he does.
Hmm.
And then me with my own mental illness challenges, like I've experienced ACT and DBT.
Yeah. Could
Um,
I just quickly, because not all the listeners will know, could you like give a couple of sentence explanation, if you can, of what DBT is and what ACT is?
yeah, so DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy,
Hmm.
and ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. Both of these came out of traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. So
Which is
that
like questioning your initial interpretations and introducing new ones, right?
exactly, exactly. Or
Yeah.
and from the behavioral side, changing your behaviors to improve your life experience, essentially. So, and there was discontent with those, especially working with different populations. That, like I can know that my cognitions are wrong. I can change my cognitions, but that doesn't change my actual experience.
Hmm.
So dialectical behavioral therapy came out of working with borderline personality disorder.
Yes. Yeah.
And it at the core of it is dialectics, which are two things that seemingly can't coexist, but they do. And the core one there is acceptance and change. So it seems like you can accept things and change at the same time, but it's actually through acceptance that you're actually able to change yourself and experience a better life. Um,
Hmm.
and one thing that DBT is really good about is it has a lot of tools that really are actionable. So things like distress tolerance as ways to actually tolerate distressing experiences.
So DBT really leans into this dual continuum thing of like you can
It
have
does.
ill-being and well-being at the same time.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
also includes emotional regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and mindfulness. So it brings mindfulness into it as well.
Which ACT does too, right?
Yes, and ACT also is very much a mindful-based therapy. And ACT is really about we actually have to sort of instead of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is trying to change our cognitions, in ACT we're accepting our cognitions and saying how can we actually sit with them and not let them actually control us, so that we actually kind of take control of our own sort of experiences in life in ways that where that are just more beneficial for experiencing the good life, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so we're looking at how we can actually integrate some of these therapies with, especially flow theory, which flow was developed by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it's really the idea of sort of like
You
being
nailed the
in.
name. I always mess it up. Sorry.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I've worked with him, so I got good at
Oh,
his name.
how fortunate of you.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Um, and um, and so it's sort of like being in the moment, lost in the moment. You lose a sense of time. Everything just like really works for you. Skill and challenge meet at the same time. Um, and so we're really so one project that we're working on. There's a concept in ACT called a creative hopelessness, which the therapist will actually try to input or kind of bring into the therapy session when the client has a control agenda. So they're sort of like, I have to control my emotions and thoughts, and they're really getting stuck in that. Um, and so we actually create this sort of like sense of hopelessness about that, so that it actually becomes able to accept that there could be a different way of actually functioning.
Right.
And we're actually saying that
Kind of the
flow,
giving up approach to shifting your
the
focus.
giving
It's
up
like,
approach is that actually by giving up, we're
yeah,
actually able to move forward and actually create
yeah.
change. And so it's actually like, and so we're actually looking at flow and hope as mechanisms that actually create change that lead towards well-being.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Could you paint a picture of that in context, like how that might work? Because I'm seeing the value of each of those things, but I'm struggling to understand the how those might connect in practice, like the use of flow states and these therapeutic models. How do you bring those together for people?
So how we bring that together is sort of thinking about actually bringing things like flow into the therapy session.
Okay.
And actually, create teaching clients how to have how to sort of set up the conditions for flow to be
Mm-hmm.
experienced,
Yeah.
um, and also working to develop a sense of hope in people, building off of Snyder's hope theory, which really focuses on goal-directed behavior, and then building agency and self-efficacy to actually bring about the goals that we have.
Is
Um,
part of the reason that you're seeing benefit in bringing these things together, that the way that, because one of the things I understand about flow is that in a state of flow, that's sort of, there's a bit of a dissolution of opposites, right? There's this those distinctions between good, bad, or self, other, or whatever it is, kind of dissolve a little bit. So is it as part of the idea there that through activating flow you can put people in the psychological state where they're able to I guess handle the dialectic of things that when we're all in our ruminative mode, no, those can't both be true, or like with ACT therapy, just accept that it's like that and do the other thing anyway.
that's exactly it. Yeah. So I think
Right,
that's a really good way
right,
to capture it.
great, nailed it.
Yeah.
um, Sweet as. Okay, well, let's go back to you a little bit, Peggy. What's kind of coming up for you? What are you working on? What's something you're learning maybe at the moment? Next steps for you in this work.
Next steps for me is I feel like I've been doing quite a bit of theoretical work. So that was, sort of like thinking about systems informed approaches to well-being. And then also the work that we've talked about integrating clinical psychology and sort of flow theory and hope. What does that practically look like? And that was sort of what your previous question was really asking. That's where sort of I see the next step is sort of
Right. So
like
now it's like bringing it into practice, trying
bringing it
it,
into
seeing what
practice.
works, what doesn't.
Exactly. So we sort of
Yeah.
have the theory there, and we can sort of look at relationships and studies and say like, oh, it looks like these are related, but what does that practically look like? That's the next
Mm.
frontier for me, is sort of saying
That's
how we can
exciting.
bring that into practice in different communities. So looking at sort of that contextual nature and how it changes for different populations, and how we can create change through that. So
Yeah. Well, knowing that you're somebody who values putting it into context and the movement from theory to sort of application, I'm sure you're very keen to see, okay, kind of throw that at the wall and see if it sticks, so to speak. Take people through it and see, okay, what does this actually mean to them? Maybe this would only work for me, who knows? So that's yeah,
And
that's the
you know,
fun
it
bit,
all
isn't it?
becomes what we know is just a starting point, and some of it will work, some of it
Mm-mm.
won't work. But it's actually by testing it out and saying, well, what works for who, under what conditions, and when? That's the question I'm interested in, is sort of like the who, what, when, and where. Does this actually work? And when does it not
Mm-hmm.
work? And actually giving guidance
Yeah.
for different people and different groups.
Those are the kinds of questions that like learning to understand things in systems, uh and probably learning various perspectives like you have in your work as well, sets you up to ask. I think often people just go, oh, does this work or doesn't it? That's the question, and it's kind of this all or nothing. But that's so right. And it's kind of a shift that, as a when you're a clinician, you're trying to support, or a coach or anything, you're trying to support people to make. It's like, okay, it's not, are you good or are you bad, or is this going to work or isn't it? It's like, how can you set this up to have as much success as possible? When does this work? When doesn't it work? Just a bit of an appreciation for the changeability and the complexity of things.
That's exactly it.
Awesome. Okay. What, just to kind of close off this call, what is one thing you'd really want to leave the listener with when it comes to well-being? What's kind of like a core insight, or maybe actionable thing that you really want people to hear?
I think what I really like them to hear is that well-being is values-based. And so if we want to be building well-being, get in touch with who you are, what you value, and then how can I actually start to align my life with the person that I want to be and make that actionable.
Man, that's absolutely perfect, because like the last conversation I had on the podcast, that was really from a complete, just like you've talked about, from a completely different field, completely different interest. This guy came out of was Robert Glazer. He came out of sort of the marketing, coaching, that kind of world, but he's come to that as well. It's like the good life is know what your values are, and then set up ways that, and find yourself in context where you can live that out. So that's cool. Seems like a bit of a core truth then. Well, I really appreciate having you on, Peggy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Mindform podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychotechs, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.